Welcome to the Pro Design Builder podcast, the show where professionals, entrepreneurs share their stories, strategies, and secrets to building a thriving business and a successful life. I'm Sam, your host. As we dive deep into the world of life experiences, entrepreneurship, and real estate, this week we bring inspiring stories with industry leaders, thought-provoking insights, and actionable advice to help create, grow, and succeed. Today, I just wanted to thank our sponsor for today, the Pro Design Builder. The Pro Design Builder teaches investors how to build spec home and new development projects. It's not just about building homes, it's about building a business, building a vision, and building a life by design. Also, I just wanted to mention, as you guys know, foster care is a mission that's near and dear to my heart. I'm an active foster dad. I've had 5 kids through our home, and we've had a number of different kids through our home at different times. I've adopted 2 kids, so the mission is never over, and it doesn't require a lot. If you ever feel the need to give, there'll be a link in the Patreon, and feel free to do that at any time. So without further ado, I just wanted to introduce our guest for today. Jeremy Harrell is a U.S. disabled combat vet. Better yet, let me just let Jeremy introduce himself. Go ahead.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Sam. Yeah, I'm a United States Army combat veteran. Served in the military for 8 years. Deployed to the initial invasion of Iraq in 2003 to 2004, working at enemy prisoner of war camps and internment facilities. And I'm also the founder and CEO of an organization that I started several years ago called Veterans Club Incorporated, and it's a organization that is designed to assist veterans and their families who have dealt with post-traumatic stress disorder, transitional issues, transitioning out of the military, and other life challenges. Except for we do this differently than traditional therapy. We do this by facing trauma head on from biblical perspectives, because we believe that Jesus is a great physician, and and the Bible has all the answers that we need. So that's what we're currently doing. I love doing it. It's a nonprofit, but in our hearts, it is a ministry. And so I'm just excited to be able to do this and work in the kingdom for the Lord.
Absolutely. I appreciate you hopping on. You shared briefly, a little bit part of your story. And one of the things that we like to do here is kind of get the backstory. So I want to just go back to your childhood and just ask you, where are you from? How'd you grow up? What did that first part of life look like for you?
Well, Sam, in full transparency, it wasn't great. I grew up in Louisville, Kentucky. Some people say Louisville. Us local people, we say Louisville. Grew up in a dysfunctional family. A lot of domestic violence, a lot of substance use, poverty, neglect, instability. The whole formula that makes me just thank God that I'm alive today on the other side of the dirt. But I will tell you that despite the challenges, despite the struggles of growing up in that environment, God nudged me very early in life to give me the perspective that what I was witnessing and what I was living through as a child was not right. And it was not something that I should continue in my legacy once I become an adult, once I become a father and a husband. And so you can look at that one or two ways. I choose to look at it as an education. I learned exactly what not to do, which is just as good oftentimes as when you are told what to do. And so anyway, it was very challenging, a lot of heartache, a lot of uncertainty, but nonetheless, it created resilience in me at a very young age, and made me strong enough to endure, hardship later on in life. it created an opportunity for me to join the military and do something bigger than myself, and kind of escape that environment and start my own life, and make sure that my children will never experience that kind of upbringing. So I'm thankful.
Yeah, that definitely resonated with me a lot, because I grew up in a very similar environment, and it created, like you, a burning desire where I don't want to see, my kids or, anybody else experience these types of things. And there's so many layers to it that need to be peeled back. And very similar to you, when I was 8, that's when I found my relationship with Jesus, because that was the only thing that made sense. That's my only source of peace based on the conditions and the things that I was looking at and watching. So that's a testament to having that relationship intact, and how it's pivotal in growing to be the man that you are today. So just want to thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, and the funny thing, Sam, is that growing up in that environment, I had never stepped foot in the church as a child, and there was no talk of God in our house, and unless it was followed up with vulgar language. But there was, God is who He is, right? And He threw the life raft, right? As I was growing up and I didn't really know who God was. I knew of Him. I've heard my friends sometimes talk about Him, but I knew that He was good. That's the first, kind of recollection I have of God, is that He was good and He was perfect. And growing up without even, being exposed to Christianity, I was just really shocked and thankful that He still threw the life raft out and let me know that, hey, what you're seeing right now is not of me, right? What you're seeing right now is the sin of the world. And of course, when I got to basic training after I graduated high school and I went straight into the Army, I got to basic training, and that's where I was actually baptized and give my life to Christ. And I always got to tell the story of how it happened, because
No, go for it.
I think it kind of it's just the realness of life, right? So
for sure,
when I got to boot camp on Sundays, typically, if you didn't go to church services, you were kind of stuck cleaning the barracks, right?
Okay.
And I had to run this buffer, and it was this old style buffer. And if you're not good at it, which I wasn't, it just drags you around. And so eventually I thought, well, wait a minute. If I go to, they called it Protestant services, right? If I go to Protestant services, well, then I don't have to run this buffer. And lo and behold, it was the greatest decision I ever made, was to not run that buffer and to go to church. And the first couple Sundays of going, it was just one of those moments that a lot of people testified to, that the Lord, I felt like the whole sermon was directed at me,
speaking to you. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And so then there was an opportunity, and even before the opportunity for baptism and to give my life to Christ come about, each Sunday that I went, I just kept going, man, I just want more. I just want more. I wish this lasted for 3 hours and not 1 hour. Right.
Yeah.
And then once there was a call to for anybody who wanted to be baptized and saved, of course, I took advantage of that opportunity, and it was the greatest decision that I could ever make in my life. And so that's kind of how my walk with faith started. Thank God for a buffer that beat me half to death, right? That made me want to go to church. So that's that's kind of the story of how it all started that way.
Yeah, that was definitely a setup, and I think a lot of these things, and not I think, because it says in the Bible, all things are weaved, for His good. So that buffer was very intentional in getting you to the place where you needed to get to, to make that interaction happen. So I want to ask you a little bit about who was your biggest influence growing up? Did you have an influence?
Yeah, so the biggest influence I had growing up was actually my grandfather, and what's interesting about him is he wasn't a highly educated man. I think he, he was a farmer. He grew up in a rural environment. I think he went to the seventh grade, maybe. But that guy had so much wisdom,
Mhm.
just that still just rings true today. And with my mom having serious mental health complications that made life difficult for her, and then of course my father was not really, he was kind of in and out of my life. There was no real stability there. He kind of stepped in, and kind of treated me as a son, and taught me a lot of important lessons. And it just when we think about education, I'm a huge fan of education. I think I think if you go to school and you become highly educated, you get a postdoctorate degree, things like that is just great. But some of the greatest lessons I ever learned were from this man who barely went to school, but he just had so much life knowledge. And so he was probably the greatest influence on my life. And I just remember always wanting to make him proud. And one of the coolest things that happened, he ended up unfortunately passing away when I was in Iraq in 2003. But when I graduated boot camp, he come down to South Carolina, and I have a picture of him, doing push-ups with me at 70 years old, right? So just a wonderful man, not a perfect man, not at all. He had a past. He had a lot of things. He was an alcoholic at one point in his life. I mean, he had done some things, right? He just like we all have. But man, he made a huge impact on me.
Man, that's great. That's great to hear. I mean, the good thing is to notice we're all imperfect beings living a very imperfect life experience, right? And we all have these things that are in our background that sometimes shapes us or sometimes directs us or guides us. And then that's kind of where, our faith kind of comes into play, because there's this redirect, right? And it kind of reshapes the way that you look at life and the way that you look at situations. And it has helped in that growth process. So thanks for sharing that. So is there a defining moment in your childhood that you would say that shaped you?
Yeah, growing up and being a victim of domestic violence and just a boatload of sin, right? Just one thing that happened is it made me very empathetic and compassionate for people. It created this desire to serve. And I didn't know where that come from, and I was proud to learn later on that Jesus was a servant leader, right? And which is my favorite form of leadership now. But I'm just so thankful that what I witnessed done the opposite for me. It created this young boy who cared, and one example of that is when I signed up to join the Army. I was in a delayed entry program. I had to wait a while before I left, and I remember it being right before I left. It was snowing outside, and I would go to these senior living apartments in my area of town, and I would take grocery store orders for seniors, and I would go to the store and pick up the things they needed, and it was just the greatest thing that I've ever done. I just loved seeing the joy on people's faces to know that I played a small role into helping them, helping them move forward. And so I've always just had that determination. So I would say the pivotal moment for me was just going, I want to be the person, I want to be the advocate for the underdog, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's what I would kind of consider myself. In fact, when I speak publicly, I generally say that I'm an advocate for the underdog. I don't like bullies, right? Which is why I joined the military, because I didn't like bullies, but I don't think I would have been that way had I not went through a lot of struggle and challenge as a child, because more than likely I would have had this skewed idea of what reality was, and so again, I'm thankful for the struggle.
Yeah, so similar to you, the perspective that I had, we came from Haiti. Obviously, we know that Haiti is a very impoverished country, but what was good about that was we were in America. Now, granted, we were in the middle of of the hood, right? And the activity wasn't it was like nothing I've ever seen before. I still always knew we had it better than the people that were on the island, right? And then also too, from my home, my perspective from my home is the people that are on the street that are living this experience during, the crack epidemic. We had it better than them because we had a family unit, right?
Yes.
So I've always carried this perspective where I knew and understand other people have it, worse than me, even though we were in a very, very challenging spot,
Yeah.
So you decided to go. What was your decision like when you decided to go into the military? Did you have other options, or how did that come about for you?
Well, I didn't really like school. I was okay at it. I could have been better. I just got tired of it, I think is what happened. And I wanted to make an impact like right away. And so I thought, and then of course, I obviously wanted to get out of the environment that I was in, and we didn't have money. So it wasn't like I could just establish roots somewhere. So I thought, I could do something better than me, or bigger than me, I should say. I could do something bigger than me. I could get out of this environment, and I could start my own life immediately without having to go to school any longer. And so that's what kind of got me interested in joining the military. And the purpose, the goal for that day was to go and just get some information about the Army. And I ended up joining that same day. And I didn't end up telling my mother until after I had signed the dotted line, right? So she wasn't too happy about that, to be honest. I'm her only child, her only son. And I kind of told her, because I knew that if I was going to tell her that there was a potential that she wouldn't be for it and that she would make me feel bad about it, and I wouldn't do it, right? I wouldn't live out, what it was that I wanted to do for once. And so I made that decision, and it ended up being okay. But that's what originally attracted me to the military, is that I could do something, bigger than myself, and it was, accessible for everybody, regardless of your socioeconomic background.
Yeah, for sure. Army was definitely an option that was on the table for me as well. So coming from the similar environment, I had two options. I could either go into the Army or get a football or maybe a wrestling scholarship. So I just remember, once I got my chance to actually play sports, once I got to high school, I was a 3-sport athlete. And I just did the weight room. I just never wanted to come home just because it didn't benefit me. But the Army was definitely on my table as an option, because I wasn't gonna have too many options to get school paid for it. So if you don't mind, just kind of share a little bit about what was your time like in the Army.
I really loved it. I did. I finally. When I got there, and boot camp for a lot of people, it's not easy, right? And it's high stress, and it's a change that you have to adapt to, and it's unlike anything we ever experienced outside of the military. But coming from the background that I come from, I loved it because it was structured, and I really needed structure, right? I really needed some kind of routine. Additionally, we were guaranteed 3 meals a day, right? In a warm place to sleep and a cool place to sleep. And so I could get yelled at. I'm fine with that. Like if you want to yell and scream it, but I just really adapted really well to it. And I loved the diversity of the military. I loved learning about other cultures. I loved, just doing life with other people. And so that was great. And then, I just excelled. I just really like buried my head in the sand, and I just really went hard at it. And like I said, I really enjoyed it. I loved the challenge of it. And then when Iraq came, I went to Iraq kind of naive. I was a 21-year-old man, and I thought I knew everything at that point, like we always do. But Iraq was different, right? Because when you watch the movies, and you're not real familiar with the military, it appears as if, number one, you never run out of ammo, right? And it appears that the good guys always win, right? But when I realized that that wasn't the case, and I realized that some very good Americans were losing their lives on a daily basis, um, it started to make me question faith, honestly. And because I was so young in my faith at that time, it wasn't very hard to do because I had the spiritual immaturity. But I just kept wondering, like, God, wait a minute, um, your protection, right? Your love, all the things that He promises. But what I couldn't wrap my brain around at that time was the difference, the separation between sin and God, right? And so what was happening, God wasn't in the business of hurting people. It was sin in the world that was doing that. But it really wrecked my faith for a while. And I had a baby girl, my first daughter, when I went, and I was missing a lot of her first things, right? Her first steps and her first words and things like that. So that created a lot of insecurity in me as a man because, and it even went further than just being in the military and being in a war zone. It was, oh my God, I'm going to be like my dad was, or I'm going to be like my family. And I'm going to miss everything about my daughter, right? So that guilt started to set in. And man, it was a very, very difficult time. And I don't know which one's worse, the combat zone or all the internal emotions about, missing my daughter's life and what is she going to think about me? Is she going to remember me when I go home? All the kind of thoughts that creep into your mind. But once we finally got back, I linked up immediately, and it's so important for listeners to hear this, is to have spiritual mentors. I can't stress that enough. To have people that you trust, that you can seek wise counsel from, because that saved my life, to be honest, because I was in a bad way upon my return, and they reminded me that, hey, there's God and there's sin, and what you witnessed is the fallen world. But God is still who He is. He is still good, and He is still in control, and He is not surprised by these things. And so anyway, for a second, I got weak, and I think that's understandable, right? You're in the middle of a combat zone, and it's the most negative place that I could ever imagine. It was probably the closest thing to hell that I can imagine, and I just couldn't believe what one man could do to another man.
Correct.
And I'm sure you're kind of familiar with that, being from Haiti. There's a lot of violence, right, in Haiti. But nonetheless, what it ended up doing is really strengthen my faith. So when I come back home from that, I wanted to try to figure out how to move on with all these new memories and experiences and this new trauma. And then I wanted to see how I could go about helping others that felt the same way.
Yeah, there's the trauma, I call it impact moments, right? Because only you can see them, and everybody has them, right? And I thought it was important to kind of talk about, this area because this is where I feel like Scripture kind of helps a ton, right?
Yeah.
And I would have to pull it up, but essentially it says, your thoughts are, he says, my thoughts are not your thoughts and my ways are not your ways. So these things that are happening on the earth and these impact moments, have the ability to affect the body and affect your thoughts and affect, the way that you feel. And what happens with soldiers is these impact moments continue to flash. And if you're not aware of getting a hold of that, that'll eventually affect the body. And that's, part of the, PTSD. So if you don't mind, just kind of explain, from your perspective, what that PTSD looks like for you or the guys around you.
Yeah. So PTSD is by far one of the most difficult, unpredictable, unreliable, relentless issues that I've ever dealt with. Even, and I mean that on a soul level. PTSD, it lies to you. it verbally abuses you. It steals, it sucks the life out of you. It's just very difficult, right? And what that is, just for people out there that's listening that may not have an understanding of it, to put it simply, it's a normal reaction to abnormal circumstances, right? So it's, basically when you've ever been threatened, your life has been threatened, or you've witnessed something very traumatic, and a lot of people associate PTSD with combat veterans, but in reality, we don't have a monopoly over that. There's a ton of other ways. My mom has PTSD from domestic violence. People who've been in severe car accidents, they have PTSD too. But it's like a roller coaster. At one point you could be feeling, oh, okay, this is good, and then the next 2 days could be just total nightmares. But it's also the inability to forget these terrible memories, and oftentimes it plays in your head like a movie, and it controls your life in a sense of you try to run from it. Well, I used to. I really don't try to do that anymore since I found faith, but
yeah,
it got further along in my faith. But it makes you want to, for example, like crowded places are hard for some with PTSD. So what does it make you do? It makes you avoid those places. Well, that seems harmless, but what if it's your children that want to go to an amusement park, right? Or they have a field trip at the zoo, or, it impacts your family. And that was always the hardest thing for me, is the impact that it had on my family, and just really not having the ability to do anything about it, or at least I thought at that point in my life. And so I've tried a lot of different things. Sam, I've been probably to 12 different PTSD treatment programs around the country. I've done a lot with the VA. And while there has been some benefit to that, there has been no benefit in comparison to my faith, and just really turning it over to the Lord, because he doesn't want us to carry trauma. He doesn't want us to be anxious. He says it often in the Bible, be anxious for nothing, right? And so, when I started to realize that this is the enemy that is using these experiences we had to manipulate our futures, it started to really create a new way of looking at things. And so I have found that, scripture, that biblical teaching has been a way for me to continue living with this debilitating condition. And I've also seen it help so many other veterans. That's why we decided to start an organization that focuses on the biblical aspect of PTSD, because most programs, almost all of them really, they're more science-based, which my wife is a therapist. Like, she is a licensed clinical social worker. So there's validity in that, but we got to remember who created science, right? We got to remember. And so anyway, I just try to cut the middleman out, so to speak, and try to, connect them with Jesus and each other.
Correct. Yeah, going right to the source. Right? I would say I had, now that you describe, PTSD, I would say that, at parts of my life, I definitely suffered from, PTSD as well. And it really came from the, interactions, with people. So I'll describe a little bit of this, to you, where, I'd never been to war, but I lived in a war zone, right, where there was a shooting every night, and you could hear all of these experiences and how they ended. Like, even, some officers, a standoff, and it ends with someone being killed, or, every night someone's life was being threatened, right? So although I didn't see these things with my eyes, your body experiences it, right? And once your body experiences, your body's like a computer, and your body doesn't forget, right? And that's when the flash comes back, and you are replaying this thing in your mind, and you don't have this sense of clarity. For me, scripture provides that sense of clarity, right? And it took me a long time to be comfortable with people, and to not view people through the lens of my experiences, right? So I would say that I'm at a point now where I actually love people, right? Whereas before I did not, and it's based on these experiences that, affect your future. So I wanted to share that because there might be people experiencing the same thing and not being able to kind of correlate all of those different things.
Yeah, I'm glad you shared that because it brought up some points in my mind. There's a great book out there called The Body Keeps Score. For anybody that wants to read, it is. There's some science, obviously, but then there's some soul level, literature in there that really kind of puts it in perspective, because PTSD is a soul problem. Like your soul is damaged, and there's a thing called moral injury, and that's not talked about near as much as it should be. And a lot of people carry that around, particularly in the veteran law enforcement space of where you justifiably had to defend yourself for someone else, but it doesn't take away the sting of what occurred, right? Like if you have to take a life or you have to pull someone out of a burning building and they don't make it, like, just because that's your job, I think sometimes society can be insensitive, right? They think just because that's your job, or I've heard people say, well, that's what you signed up for, but I think it's a very insensitive way. We signed up to help people, but we're also human beings, right?
Correct.
Yeah. So, but what you said, the ability to trust comes to mind too, Sam. When you've experienced these traumatic events time and time again, it really it almost makes you see people in the light in which you described as what you've experienced. So, you're walking down a dark street. Your first thought is, okay, am I going to have to protect myself? Is this person going to attack me? Or are they going to hurt me?
Correct.
And there's a big, even though we see what we see today on the news and things, there's a big chance that none of that will happen. But there is a chance. Mm-hmm. And I remember being in Las Vegas one time. I think you'll think this is a funny story, but I was in Las Vegas and one of the folks that were in our group was a doctor of psychology, right? And I felt like a little bit on this trip, I was kind of like her case study, because Las Vegas is very crowded, right? And I don't really even like the vibe of Vegas. It's kind of like what I would consider Sodom and Gomorrah, right? But as I'm going through there, it's crowded and I'm in front of everybody. Well, she asked me, Jeremy, why do you feel like you have to be in front of everybody? And I said, well, I feel like that if something happens out of this group, I probably have the most training to be able to react if something does happen. And she goes, well, what if I tell you that there's a 99.9% chance that nothing will? I said, well, that's not 100 though. And until you can tell me that there's 100% chance, I feel like it's my role and responsibility, which really isn't true. I'm not a savior, right?
Correct.
But I just felt like it's my role and my responsibility to protect the group. And of course, I don't believe that now, because I've realized that we don't have near the amount of control as we like to think we do, that really God has the control. But at that point, that's how I responded to her. And she was like, well, that's fair. I guess you have a point. And I said, well, let me know when it's 100%, and I'll be in the back and I'll be laughing, joking, cutting up, relaxing. I said, but until then, this is how it's going to be. And I wish I could change it. Yeah. But I'm just built that way now, right? So yeah.
Yeah, I feel the exact same way. And the crazy part is, this is up until a couple of years ago, I felt the same way when I would go to church. Right.
Yeah.
And then I had shared these thoughts because my wife knows all of my history. She knows all of my experiences and stuff like that. And I would just openly share these thoughts about, the people at the church and stuff like that. But then she'll go, this is what she'll go. She goes, have you seen that from the people in church before? I go, no. She goes, right. Okay. All right. So just as a reminder that, yes, you've seen and you've experienced these things, but you haven't seen or experienced them in this place. Right. So dial it back a little bit.
Yeah. Well, and you brought up a good interesting thing to plug right now before I forget is the value of being open with your spouse. Right.
Very important. Very important.
really just, putting it all on the table, right? Good or bad, ugly or not, but just putting it all out there so that you have a deeper relationship, because there's a lot of married veterans that I know who say, and I was this way for a lot longer time than I should have been, but
Mhm.
I think the thing is they want to protect their spouse from it by just not talking about it. They believe that they're protecting their spouse, and then maybe they don't want their spouse to look at them in a different way.
Mhm.
But I'm like, it's like carrying poison in
Mhm.
your body. Yeah, and so that's a big issue, I think, just in life as men. And I can only speak on behalf of me because I'm a man, but
No, for sure.
men
For sure. No.
men tend to hold on to all these things, right? Because number one, society somehow, somewhere down the line, made us believe that we had to, right?
Mhm. Mhm.
But I think we do our families a disservice when we can't look at them and say, you know what, your dad's having a hard day right now. I have some fear around being in this place with this many people. Um,
Yes.
but
Yes.
but because the Lord our God
Yes. Amen.
is around us,
Yes.
I should be able to put that fear away.
Correct. Correct.
That's how they learn, right? And that's how hopefully they go through life not being that way, not taking the fears of the world and just holding them close. And so anyway,
Mhm.
I just wanted to plug that because you talked about, telling your wife all these things that you've been through. I think it's really important for listeners to feel like they should be able to do that. I mean, I think that's critical in a marriage, and just in
Yeah,
my opinion.
absolutely. I just remember this was very very early on in our dating process. I remember saying it to myself, how much of me is she really willing to receive, right?
Yeah,
So
yeah,
what I did, I was like, I just gotta just tell her, right? And I would give her small pieces of stories, and I would just kind of wait and see what her reaction was like, and she didn't
yeah,
grimace or anything like that. And then I would just tell her more, and she kind of just received all of it. And this is kind of, I didn't know exactly at that moment that she was going to be my wife, but I was just met with such a level of love that I've never received before.
mm,
And she just said to me,
amen.
she goes, Sam, no one deserves to live like that or deserves, those type of experiences, right? And then it just left me with a like, wow, right?
Yeah,
She really gets me. She knows me better than I know myself. And so sharing these moments, especially as a man, that men typically don't like to speak about these things, are vital to your growth as a man, for sure.
yeah, yeah, absolutely,
Mm-hmm.
absolutely.
So you're in the service, right? And you got injured.
Hmm. Yeah.
Do you mind sharing a little bit about what happened there?
Yeah. Well, it's a combination of things. Obviously, there's some physical issues, right, from the wear and tear that the military in general puts on your body, but specifically uh, in a time of war. And then there's the invisible wounds, right, which what I would consider PTSD, traumatic brain injury, depression. I mean, there's the sky's the limit, but that's again a lot. Sometimes I believe that society, they kind of dilute mental wounds, right? Because people believe that if you're walking, you're talking, and your arms work and your legs work, well, then you must be okay. But that's
Correct.
totally not the case. In fact, I would much rather, because I've had both, I would much rather have physical wounds than soul wounds, right? Because the physical will heal.
Yep.
Eventually, it will stop hurting. But what I've noticed with mental wounds is that they they're going to be there at some level forever. Now, it's important that I make sure everybody understands that it doesn't mean that they have to be at a level where you can't function, right? But you're never going to be able to erase memories. And it doesn't matter if you go to war or if you fall off your bike in the second grade and you bust your head and you need stitches. You're always going to remember that. I don't know
Right.
about you, Stan, but I remember every time I got stitches as a child, right?
Yeah.
Our brains are designed to hold those memories to protect us. I believe, like, once upon a time long ago, when there wasn't modern medicine, it was God's gift. And so when I talk about PTSD sometimes, I talk about it sometimes in rooms full of very, very broken men. And I say, I sometimes consider PTSD a gift. And when I say that, I get some of the strangest looks, right? And
Yes, yes, yes,
sometimes
yes, 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 yes.
sometimes I'm like, man, but I don't mean that we should want it. I just mean that God has given us the ability to remember everything that tried to kill us
Correct.
or that put us in danger, in hopes that we can avoid it in the future. And it's all about perspective, like anything else in life. So if I'm a kid, and the cliche is don't touch the stove, but I do it because I'm curious and I'm a kid. I go touch the stove. It burns me once. I literally never do that again, right? The rest of my life on purpose, anyway.
Hmm.
Well, that's God's gift of protecting you,
Yeah.
right? He allows you to retain that memory, but it's not meant to haunt you. It's not meant to destroy you.
Correct.
Satan does that. Our common enemy does
Hmm.
that, and he uses those opportunities to try to interfere with our life, right? And the only way I was able to sort that out, unfortunately, no traditional therapist could do that for me. It
Hmm.
was only my spiritual mentors who sat down with me week after week after week, who put that to light for me, who showed me that, God give you a gift to remember what could potentially kill you, not so that you can be unable to function, or to not be or to be a bad husband or to be a bad father, but to save you. Essentially, it's only when we allow Satan to continue to drive that nail is when it starts going the other direction. So what I try to do when I'm mentoring veterans who are dealing with this, I try to use that same story. It's like, let's make sure that we catch, right? We hold thoughts captive, right? As Paul says,
Okay.
let's make sure that we
Absolutely.
catch these thoughts so that we know that, hey, this isn't meant to destroy you. This is meant to save you. So once I explain that and people get in the habit of training themselves, and they start to live that out, they start to have much more productive and better lives, a better quality of life.
So there's um, Dan Sullivan. He's an author. Probably one of my three favorite books. The Gap in the Game. 10x is easier than 2x, and Who Not How. Right. So he mentioned this thing, which was a big realization for me. And he talks about reframing these thoughts or these experiences, right? For us to impact thoughts, this trauma, right? And we could look at it two ways. We could look at it as it happened to us, and we are, victims of this thing, or it happened for us,
Yeah.
right? And the Bible says, he weaves all things for his good. And I remember when I really started looking at that, that it really helped me kind of reframe some of these thoughts, and maybe some of them were to thicken me up, thicken my skin. Maybe some of those were to propel me in the direction that I'm headed in foster care. Right, I wouldn't have
Yeah.
had this burning desire to help based on myself. It was because I witnessed and seen some things that really left me shook and didn't make sense. And now it's time to act on that and be that bridge and be that conduit and teach through my experiences and through the scripture on how they could recover, right? So there is this healing element that's, kind of unites the both of us, because you're doing it with men in PTSD, and I'm doing it with kids trying to make sense of things that just really don't make sense.
Yeah. Well, and Sam, I just want to commend you and your bride for, going down that journey of fostering kids. And I mean, that is that is so difficult. I mean, it's one thing to sit in front of men who at least have a general understanding of life, but it's another when there's kids that just don't understand why what happened to them happened, and they don't really have the capacity just because of their development at that stage to really understand it. But yet here you are trying to console them. Here you are trying to retrain them and trying to show them what love looks like. And
Correct.
so I just want to commend you for that, because it's very much needed. And we all know what Jesus thinks about the children, right?
For sure.
He loves nobody more. And you all are being obedient and doing that hard work. And so I just want to commend you on doing that, because I don't know that I'm built to do it. I mean, I love my kids, and I typically love kids, but you have to be, it's a special, we all have our gifts, right? And I'm just glad that you all have decided to travel down that road and do that good work.
Yeah, thank you. I really love, love what we do in foster care. Just seeing these kids improve, right? I know this is to me, this kind of warms up my heart, but it is also a little sad, right? So we had one of the kids that were in our home, right? He was with us for about 4 to 5 months or so, and he had improved so much. Is because his environment was so different, right? He's loved, he's cared for, he's all of these things. And I remember my wife would, text back and forth, with mom, and they went to a doctor's appointment together, right? And then my wife was like, "Wow," his mom was like, "Wow, you guys trained him. He's so different. He's like, he's better." Right. So, being on the ground floor, that's what I say. It warms my heart, but it's also, a little sad.
Right. Right.
You're on the ground floor. You get to see these improvements that, I just never really share, that about. So this is just kind of giving me a platform to continue to share these different aspects of that mission.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And then the fact that you get attached to these children as well. But yeah, I mean, some of the things, I remember, and I guess why it means so much to me is obviously, I know that through my mom's mental illness at times, she would sometimes say things such as, "Well, at least I didn't put you up for adoption," or something to that effect, right? Mm-hmm. And I thought, well, that could have really been one of the best things that happened to me, right? Because it was, and I never would tell her that. I don't want to break her heart, right?
Correct.
No matter what she says, I can choose how I want to respond, but
correct.
But in reality, I'm thinking that might have been a better opportunity for me. And so being a kid growing up in an environment where I knew that some of my friends at school had a different life, they would say things about hanging out with their dad at a baseball game or going on vacation or doing, and I'd go, what does that mean?
Yeah, exactly.
So I guess that's why I have a heart for what you all do, because, it very easily could have been me. And it's also to note that there are some really good opportunity for kids who go through foster care and or go through adoption. Is the goal isn't to further traumatize. The goal is to try to help them heal and to learn and to grow and to be safe. And I think that sometimes can be a stigmatic discussion of people automatically assume that if there's a kid in the foster system, then they must have had all these terrible people and that's not the case. The people that I know that do this, and I just had breakfast with another guy. We do Bible study, and he does that, and man, they had a great Christmas. And anyway, I can talk about that all day, but again, I just think it's really good. And what you're doing and what everybody does, you're creating an opportunity to stop the trauma early, right?
You have to. Yeah, exactly.
Right. so that they don't end up being a 40-year-old man or a 30-year-old man who don't know what to do with the trauma. So then, or I say man, it could be women too, but
Yep.
that could end up doing something that really harms them in the future, right? So yeah.
Correct. If you don't mind sharing, just tell us a little bit more about your organization, how that started and how that's going for you guys.
Yeah. So Veterans Club started as a Facebook group, a private Facebook group. And the intention was, again, as I mentioned earlier, as I was going through all these different programs around the country, trying to figure out what in the world was wrong with me, right? And trying to learn as much as I can about PTSD. And one thing that we're taught early in the military is in order to defeat the enemy, and this applies to faith, you have to know the enemy, right?
Absolutely. Mm-hmm.
And so I threw myself in to learn as much as I could about PTSD in hopes that I could get it to a manageable place so I can enjoy my life. And so, but while I was at these different centers, I would hear veterans, they wouldn't necessarily say that they missed the job, but they more so missed the connection, the camaraderie, right? And we know that through Scripture, we're not designed to do life alone. We're designed to be in community. And so I thought, wait a minute, we can still have connection even if we're not in uniform anymore, right? And so I thought, well, I'll start this Facebook group, and I don't know, maybe we'll have 4 or 5 veterans get together in our community once a month and hang out, right? And we started like that, and then in 3 years we were helping thousands of veterans across the country, not just in Kentucky where I'm at, but across the country. And then we become a nonprofit and started developing actual programs like equine facilitated mentoring, which is kind of a form of equine therapy, resilient mind program, teaching resilience and helping veterans meet their goals. We have a military child program where military children get together and they go out to the barn, they get introduced to horses, they have pizza, and they really just start that community for themselves with the hope that once we're gone, that they continue these authentic relationships throughout their life for support, right? So we do that. We do a lot of recreational activities. We do some vocational training. But the whole goal is to help veterans overcome this challenge with PTSD and how it impacts their life, and also to keep families together. I don't think that's mentioned as much as it should be with some of these non-governmental organizations, because the divorce rate for combat veterans is 80%.
Oh wow!
Yeah, I mean, when somebody first told me that number, Sam, I thought, well, somebody really just pulled that number out of the hat. That's extreme. Wow. Yeah. But I did the research, and it absolutely, well, because of the the deployments, the time separate, the stress of it all, and then of course coming back a different person.
Readjustment. Yeah, exactly.
So we want to also use this opportunity to keep families together. And so initially we helped just the veteran. And then we realized that we would do so much good for the veteran, and then they would go back into their environment, and then maybe their spouse would say, yeah, you've said this before. You said you were going to change. You said that you were going to stop doing this, right? And then the veteran would go, well, forget about it, kind of thing.
Oh,
and so I'm like, we need to let these families heal together, from the children all the way to the adults, to let them get together and heal at their pace. And we need to introduce Jesus to them. Now, there's no requirement that they become believers. We do this work because we are believers, right?
Right.
But we also know the power of the Holy Spirit, right? And we've had a tremendous amount of success bringing Jesus as the focal point in their healing. He is the healer, right? And so anyway, that's what our ministry is about. It's about, creating all those opportunities for healing and recovery and transition and strong families.
Yeah. So you touched on community. And I remember doing we do a lot of trauma-based training, for these kids to see different signs of different things and know and understand. I mean, I remember one of the case studies that they talked about soldiers being deployed, and then they talked about drug use during the time, and then when they came back, what life looked like, and what allowed for a full recovery was community, right? So there's been this massive push that I'm on, in this journey that I'm on, to create more sense of community, right? And doing that by having these open conversations and dialogues about the things that don't make sense to people, right? Which is like PTSD and these different trauma-based sort of things that we don't know are really truly affecting us, but there is healing, with the scripture. So I just wanted to, throw that out there. So how can someone support you if they wanted to, support your organization?
Well, the biggest way is obviously donating, because it creates an opportunity for us to be able to use those funds in a plethora of our programs. But of course, and they can do that on the website at veteransclubinc.org, or they could call into the organization if they wanted to do it kind of the old-fashioned way and send a check or something like that. We can give them the information for that. But also, we're always seeking volunteers, and not just volunteers because we do a lot of homeless outreach and prison ministry and stuff like that. But also volunteers to come in and teach veterans about Christ, right? About what it looks like to follow Christ, and we just, it takes a village. And one thing about me is I don't pretend to know everything, and I want these veterans to hear perspective from many different people, from many different walks of life. We like to have a diversified group of helpers. And so we're always looking for good volunteers to come and help us out. And then, of course, we want veterans, first responders, and their family members. We want them to come out and see what we do and be a part of our programs. And it's never a cost to them at all. We don't have a cost for anything that we do. Thanks to generous donors, right? We don't have to do that. But we create opportunities for them to connect and reconnect as families and to do things as families. And the fruit, Sam, has been much more than I ever thought.
Great.
I had a thought of what it would be like, but when I've actually witnessed it, it's just amazing what God can do when you sit back and you listen and you let him do the hard lifting, right? So it's great ministry.
That's great to hear. I'll make sure that the link to your organization is in the show notes. All right. So I know we're going to be wrapping up soon.
Yeah.
But I just wanted to ask, and that's something that I ask at every show, is what is your best lesson learned in life and in business?
Yeah. There's so many that come to mind, but to, one of the best lessons that I've learned is when you've reached your limit, when you've lost, when you're exhausted, when you feel like you can't go any further, that's a good indicator to call on the Lord, right? To intervene, to come in, to reveal what it is that he wants you to do next, right? And ask for wisdom and discernment. But also in the midst of suffering, whether it be maybe things didn't go your way, you didn't get the partnership you wanted, or maybe your organization or your business is starting out slower than you'd imagined, and there's all this stress, to not try and do what's natural, which is to rush through that process, but to set in the middle of it. I know that sounds counterproductive, but to set in the middle of it and just see what lessons there are to be learned in the midst of the suffering and the struggle, because that's where I've learned the most. I haven't learned the most in success.
Correct.
I've learned the most in failure, or even if it's not failure, but in suffering. So I think we don't like to be uncomfortable, and we have this natural innate ability to want to get out of it as soon as we can, but we lose a lot of good lessons along the way. So I would ask people that if you're having a hard time in life in general, but in your business or just in your personal life or spiritual life, number one, seek wise counsel. But number two, stay there for a moment, journal what it is that you're thinking, that you're going through, how you feel, and then adjust fire and figure a way out of it.
Thank you. What
Yeah.
about business, or that's all encompassing? Right?
That's everything, right? That's a one size fits all. It's good in business. It's what has led us to be so successful so quick. I never said the word nonprofit until I started one. So I had no investors. I had no background, no education. I trusted the Lord, and I failed many, 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 many times. But what I didn't do is I did not quit. You only lose when you quit, right? So yeah,
exactly.
Yeah.
Fall down 6 times, get up 7.
That's right.
That's just the reality of the situation. So
I love it.
I just wanted to say thank you for coming on. Thank you for serving this country. Thank you for continuing to serve, our veterans, which needs this type of exposure, which needs, this relationship with Christ, which, in our church, they say the relationship with Christ changes everything.
Yeah.
And just want to say thank you for coming on.
Yes, Sam. Thank you. It's been a great conversation, and I hope the listeners get some value. And again, thank you for what you and your family do as well. Thank you.
I appreciate it.